He heard the girl before he even saw her. A small voice, thin and shaking, trying to sound brave. She stood beside the gas pump, hugging a worn backpack to her chest, while her mother kept her head down, pretending everything was fine. It wasn't. The biker could see that from 50 feet away. The mother's hands trembled when she reached for the nozzle. Her sleeves were tugged low, too low for the heat of the evening. And the girl's words cut through the stale air like something raw and unfinished. "I tried protecting my mom, but he said he'd come back." People around them kept moving, filling tanks, checking phones. Not one person looked twice. But the biker did. He noticed the woman's unsteady breathing, the way she flinched when a truck door slammed nearby. He saw the bruise she tried to hide, blooming purple beneath fabric that didn't belong to the season. He saw the exhaustion in her posture, the kind that doesn't come from work or long days, but from fear stretched over weeks. The girl glanced up at him then, just for a second. Her eyes held something he recognized. Not childhood, not innocence. Something older, heavier. The silent hope that someone, anyone, might notice. The biker didn't move toward them, didn't speak. He watched. He listened. He weighed every detail, like a man counting breaths, before stepping into cold water. And in that measured silence he understood one thing with absolute clarity. The threat wasn't gone, it was circling. Close. The kind that leaves marks on a woman's arms and steals the steadiness from a child's voice. The mother's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, swallowed hard, and locked it without answering. But her face said everything. Her world had been shrinking day by day, hour by hour, and whatever message she'd just received had pulled it even tighter. He noticed the car parked crooked by the edge of the lot. Dark sedan, tinted windows, idling even though no one sat inside, at least no one visible. He recognized the type. Men who wait, men who watch, men who think fear is ownership. The girl tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mum, he's here." The woman whispered something back, but it wasn't reassurance. It was resignation. The biker knew the sound of defeat. It carried the same weight across every town, every highway, every sleepless night. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a domestic argument. This was a woman trying to survive the next 10 minutes without breaking, and a child trying to hold her together with words too small for the danger closing in. The biker's jaw tightened. He didn't look at the girl again, didn't want to spook her, but something in him shifted, like an old door unlocking. He remembered other nights, other shadows, other voices saying they tried, they really tried, but no one listened. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who understood one thing perfectly. Some dangers only stop when a harder presence steps into the room. The wind carried the low rumble of engines from far off on the highway. Familiar engines, the kind that moved in packs when the air changed. He wasn't calling anyone, not yet. But there were moments when the road itself seemed to whisper ahead of time, warning those who lived by its code. He took one step forward. Only one. But it was enough for the girl to breathe out softly, as if she sensed something she couldn't explain. The mother didn't see him. Not really. She was too busy checking the edges of the lot, scanning shadows, hoping the fear she carried hadn't followed her this far. But it had. And the biker saw it, all of it. The trembling, the bruise, the silent plea, the weight that didn't belong to them alone anymore. He didn't know them, didn't need to. The road teaches a man to recognize the moment when someone else's fight becomes his. And that moment had just arrived. Follow this account so you don't miss the Guardian's stories. The biker stayed where he was for a moment, letting the scene sink deeper into the silence of his mind. The woman finished pumping gas with movements that looked rehearsed, like she was trying not to draw attention, even though fear already circled her like smoke. The girl pressed closer to her side, watching every corner of the lot the way someone twice her age might watch a battlefield. The biker noticed the car again. The idling dark sedan had shifted slightly, just enough to tell him someone inside was adjusting their angle, not leaving, not approaching, just watching. A predator testing patience. He'd seen that pattern in too many places. Parking lots behind bars, cracked alleys behind motels, dim sidewalks where shadows waited for the weak to be alone. The woman moved toward the convenience store. Her steps were cautious, one hand holding the girl, the other gripping her purse tighter than needed. The biker followed at a distance, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid making her feel cornered. She didn't need another threat right now. Inside, the store felt stale. Cheap lighting, old coffee burning on a hot plate, a cashier absorbed in his phone, no one paying attention to anything but their own boredom. The biker stood near the back, looking at a shelf he didn't care about, watching through the reflection in the freezer door. The mother stood by the counter, holding a can of soup and a small pack of bandages. She tried sliding a card through the reader, but her hand shook again. The payment failed. She apologized softly, the kind of apology that carried a lifetime of being stepped on. She searched her purse, pulling out a few singles, then hesitated. The girl watched her mother's face tighten when she counted the bills, barely enough for one item. "Mom, it's okay," the girl whispered, but it wasn't. The biker saw it in the woman's shoulders, heavy and defeated. She kept the bandages, put the soup back. The biker noticed something else then. When she shifted her purse, a piece of paper slid halfway out of the side pocket. Not random trash, not a receipt, a photograph. He saw the edge of it, a man's hand gripping the woman's wrist so tightly the skin around it looked white. No face in the frame, just force, just proof. And beneath the photo, the corner of a restraining order folded so many times it looked ready to tear. The biker understood. This wasn't a bad relationship. This wasn't a temporary break. This was a woman hiding from someone who had already crossed every line, and now she was standing under fluorescent lights, trying to pretend her life hadn't collapsed into survival mode. The girl tugged her sleeve again. "Mom, can we go?" The woman nodded, thanked the cashier, and walked out quickly. Not fast enough to look suspicious, just fast enough to show she was measuring every second. Outside, the air felt thicker. The sedan was still there. This time the biker saw a silhouette behind the wheel, barely visible through the tinted glass. Someone watching the mother step out, someone leaning forward as if confirming she hadn't gone far enough to escape. The biker stepped out next. His boots hit the pavement with slow, deliberate weight. He didn't stare at the car. Predators feed on attention. They grew braver when they thought nobody strong enough cared. So he kept his eyes on the mother and the girl, but he let his presence spread across the space like a warning. The woman opened her car door, ushering the girl inside quickly. Her eyes darted toward the sedan, but only for a second. Fear controlled her pace. Fear decided her next move. She slammed her door, started the engine, and pulled forward. As she turned out of the lot, the sedan rolled out too. Smooth, silent, following from a distance that wasn't accidental. The biker exhaled once, slow and steady. This wasn't just intimidation. This was stalking, a controlled hunt. And the woman was driving straight into a night where no one else would step in. He walked toward his bike, reached for his keys, and paused when he felt his phone buzz. A number he knew, a rider from another town, a message as simple as a shift in the wind. "Engine trouble ahead?" That was their code, their old one. It meant, "You're not alone if you don't want to be." The biker didn't reply. Not yet. He watched the taillights of the woman's car fade into the street. The sedan followed, its headlights dimmed intentionally. The biker strapped on his gloves, adjusted his jacket, mounted the bike with the quiet certainty of a man stepping into something he'd already decided to finish. He kicked the engine alive. The rumble rolled through the night like a low growl, a sound predators didn't ignore. The biker eased out of the lot, keeping distance, blending into traffic as naturally as breath. He didn't tail too close. He didn't rush. He simply tracked the pattern, watching how the woman changed lanes nervously, how she checked her rear view too often, how the sedan mimicked every turn without hesitation. He recognized the streets she chose, not the main roads, not the brightly lit ones. She took the quiet ones, routes you pick when you don't want to go home, but you have nowhere else to go. Streets where a woman can disappear without anyone asking why. The biker's hands tightened on the handlebars. She wasn't running errands. She was circling, buying time, hoping the sedan would give up, hoping tonight wouldn't be the night everything broke. The girl's words replayed in his mind. "I tried protecting my mom. A child shouldn't be carrying that kind of weight. A woman shouldn't be driving through back streets to avoid a man she once trusted." And a predator shouldn't feel safe enough to follow them through the city without fear. The biker took a slow breath, tasting the cold night air. The Guardian's call wasn't something he talked about. It wasn't a rule written anywhere. It was something older than that. Something understood by the men who rode through the dark with eyes sharp enough to catch what others ignored. And tonight, that call had already begun to echo. The woman kept driving in circles, left turns, right turns, doubling back through neighborhoods where porch lights flickered and stray dogs wandered between trash cans. The girl sat stiff in the passenger seat, her silhouette barely visible through the tinted side window. Every time the car slowed at an intersection, the biker could see her small outline turn toward the sedan behind them, making sure the danger hadn't disappeared. It hadn't. Predators rarely lose interest once they decide someone belongs to them. The biker hung back 3, sometimes 4 car lengths, close enough to intervene, far enough to remain invisible. He wasn't there to scare the woman or confuse her. He was there to watch the hunter, not the prey. The sedan's driver grew bolder. The distance narrowed. The brake lights of the woman's car glowed more often, her panic visible even from the biker's position. She wasn't heading home. She was trying not to lead the man there. She was thinking like someone who'd been hunted before. Her car turned down a narrow road near an old laundromat. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few flickering neon signs casting pale blue shapes across the cracked pavement. The sedan followed. The biker rolled in behind them, keeping his engine low. The laundromat sat half lit, half dead. Inside, a couple of machines churned loudly, unattended. A tired man sat on a bench near the back, asleep or pretending to be. The biker watched the mother step inside with the girl, clutching a small basket of clothes. Nothing heavy, just enough to justify being out. She wasn't here to wash anything. She was here because the place had cameras, because the bright lights made her feel less alone, because she needed a moment to breathe. She loaded a single machine. Coins rattled. Water began to fill the drum. The girl sat on a plastic chair, hugging her backpack, eyes still fixed on the window facing the parking lot. The biker stood outside near his bike, pretending to check the chain, but his eyes reflected everything through the glass. The sedan parked across the lot. The driver didn't get out. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to compress the woman's entire world into fear. The biker could see the silhouette now, broad shoulders, tense posture, a man leaning forward with possession carved into every line of him. The woman stepped closer to the window and pretended to check the weather on her phone. Her hand shook so badly the screen shifted in and out of her grip. The girl rose from her chair and moved beside her, resting her small hand on her mother's arm, the way some adults do when they know no one else will help. The biker noticed a detail then, small, but sharp. The girl's backpack had a name tag hanging from the zipper, a laminated card with school information, emergency contacts, and a faded photo of her mother clipped behind it. But there was another thing tucked behind the plastic sleeve, a folded courthouse letter. The top line visible through the transparency read, "Petition for full protective custody." It wasn't filed. It wasn't stamped. It sat there like an unfinished plea. The biker's jaw flexed. This woman had tried asking for help. She'd tried the legal route, but something stalled her paperwork. Fear, maybe. Or someone convincing her the system wouldn't protect her, or someone promising consequences if she made the wrong move. The girl tugged the letter from the sleeve, looked at it, then tucked it back in with a quiet determination that didn't match her age. She held onto her mother's coat and whispered something the biker could almost read from her lips. "He's not supposed to be near us." Her mother nodded, but it wasn't agreement, it was helplessness. The biker shifted slightly, enough for the girl to notice him outside. She didn't look away this time. She held his gaze for a long moment, longer than a child should ever have to hold any stranger's gaze. But she didn't seem afraid of him. She seemed relieved that someone else saw the danger. The woman followed her daughter's stare and noticed the biker for the first time. Her eyes darted toward him, then to the sedan, then back again. She didn't ask for help, she didn't gesture, she didn't signal anything. But fear has its own vocabulary, and the biker understood every word written on her face. The sedan's engine revved once, a warning, a threat disguised as impatience. The biker's phone buzzed again, another message from the same number as before. "Sky's getting dark. Want company?" He didn't answer. Not because he didn't need it, but because the timing wasn't right. Not yet. The sedan door cracked open. A leg stepped out. Heavy boot. The kind of stance that said he wasn't here to talk. The man didn't move further, didn't approach the laundromat, just planted himself outside the car as if claiming the ground and everyone on it. The mother stiffened inside. She clutched the edge of the folding table to stay upright. The girl pressed her face into her mother's side. Her eyes still tracked every movement outside. The biker took one step forward, leaning against his bike more deliberately. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just presence. The man by the sedan glanced at him, sizing him up with a slow, dismissive smirk. He wasn't intimidated, not yet. Men like him rarely recognized real danger until it stood too close to ignore. The biker didn't look directly at him. He didn't need to. Men who expect obedience start to lose confidence when someone refuses to acknowledge their authority. The man eventually slid back into the driver's seat, annoyed. The sedan idled again, but this time with impatience. He wasn't leaving. He was waiting for the woman to step outside where the cameras wouldn't save her. The biker exhaled slowly. He recognized the rhythm of escalation. The man wasn't going to walk away, and the woman wasn't going to be safe the moment she left the laundromat. A gust of wind rolled through the parking lot. Cold, heavy. The kind that carried the scent of rain and asphalt. It also carried something else, a distant rumble, faint but certain. Multiple engines, low, measured, familiar. Not close enough to be visible, but close enough that the biker felt the vibrations settle beneath his boots. He didn't call them, but the road had ways of speaking between men who lived by its code. The woman checked the machine, realizing her clothes had barely started spinning. She wasn't washing anything, she was delaying, buying time she didn't have. The girl pulled out the courthouse letter again. This time she held it like an answer she didn't know how to use. She pressed it into her mother's hand. The biker could see the words from where he stood, reflected in the window. Immediate danger to petitioner and minor child. The mother's eyes watered, but she blinked it away instantly. She'd cried enough. She was out of tears, out of options, out of safe minutes in the night. The biker stood up straighter. The moment was approaching, the pressure in the air tightening like a rope pulled from both ends. He rested one hand on the handlebar, the gesture quiet but decisive. The sedan door opened all the way this time. The man stepped out fully, and the night shifted. The man stepped out of the sedan with the confidence of someone who believed the world bent around his anger. Broad shoulders, stiff posture, a jaw set tight enough to crack teeth. He scanned the laundromat not for danger but for witnesses, people he could intimidate, people he could ignore. He didn't see the biker as a problem, just another man in a parking lot with nowhere to be. The biker watched him move, slow, assertive, every step calculated to remind the woman she belonged in his shadow. The man didn't head straight for the entrance. He walked a slow arc around the front of the laundromat, testing angles, looking for the moment she'd have to walk out with her child and cross the empty space where no one could intervene fast enough. Inside, the woman tensed. Her eyes followed him through the glass, her body instinctively pushing her daughter behind her, even though she knew it wouldn't matter. The girl held onto her mother's coat, her small voice lost behind the hum of the machines. She wasn't crying. She was bracing. The biker leaned one elbow on the handlebar, appearing almost relaxed, but his eyes tracked every detail, the way the man's hand hovered near his jacket pocket, the quick glances toward the laundromat door, the tightening of his jaw when he noticed the biker wasn't looking away. The man paused beside the trash bin near the entrance, pretending to check something on his phone. But the biker saw the reflection in the glass, a text being typed, then deleted, then retyped. A message sent to someone not far from here, reinforcements, or someone who expected a report. The biker's phone buzzed again in his vest. "You need a hand or just the eyes?" He didn't respond. Not yet. The mother moved toward the machine, pretending to adjust the settings even though it had barely started spinning. Her fingers were trembling too hard to grip the dial. The girl watched the door, her breath fogging the glass in a small circle. The man outside pressed his thumb against the corner of his phone, then slid it into his pocket. He looked up at the window and locked eyes with the woman, A small smile curled on his lips. Not warm, not kind, a promise of control. The biker straightened, just enough to shift the tension in the air. The man noticed. The smile faded. He took 2 steps toward the biker. "You got a problem?" The biker didn't answer. Silence always bothered men who relied on intimidation. "I said," the man repeated, stepping closer. "You got a problem?" The biker looked at him once, one measured glance, cold and flat, then looked away as if the man wasn't worth more than a fraction of attention. That was enough. The man's posture changed instantly. Offense, anger, fragile ego scraping against reality. "Hey!" he snapped, moving closer. "I'm talking to you." Still nothing. The biker's stillness wasn't weakness. It was a warning. Inside, the woman pulled her daughter close. The girl peeked over her mother's arm, eyes darting between the biker and the man outside. She didn't understand the mechanics of confrontation, but she understood danger. She squeezed her mother's hand, and the biker saw it, the exact moment the girl realized the biker wasn't afraid of the man in the parking lot. The man stepped even closer, now within arm's reach of the biker. His breath was sharp with anger. "You following me, huh? You got some reason to stare at my car?" The biker didn't speak, didn't twitch. His silence carved a space between them thicker than any threat. The man's nostrils flared. "You one of those wannabe tough guys? Think the jacket makes you something?" The biker lifted his gaze slowly, locking eyes with him. No expression, no emotion. But something behind the look made the man's shoulders tense involuntarily. "What?" the man barked. "Say something." The biker let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, then stepped away from the bike, closing the space between them by a single deliberate step. Inside the laundromat, the woman gasped softly. The girl's eyes widened. The man puffed his chest, pretending confidence. "Yeah? You want to go?" But the biker didn't take the bait. He looked past him, toward the laundromat door, toward the woman and the girl pressed against the glass. Then he looked back at the man with a certainty that drained color from the air. The man followed the direction of the look, just long enough to realize the biker knew exactly who he was hunting. He stiffened. "That's none of your business." The biker didn't move. "You don't know her," the man said. "You don't know me." Still nothing. "You don't get to step in," he continued, voice rising. "You hear me?" The biker's phone buzzed again. This time, a different rider. "Rolling through town. Need me to slow down?" The biker reached into his pocket, not rushed, not aggressive, just steady. The man stepped back instinctively, thinking it was a weapon. It wasn't. The biker checked the message, then slid the phone away. The man swallowed once, anger mixed with unease. "Look, she's my wife. This is between us." The biker's eyes lowered briefly to the mark on the man's knuckles. Fresh damage, skin split recently. The same shape, the same angle as the bruise the woman tried to hide on her arm. The biker inhaled once, slow. A decision forming like a steel edge sharpening. The man took another step back. "Don't get involved." But the biker already was. The mother inside the laundromat stepped closer to the door, her breath quickening. The girl gripped her arm and whispered something the biker couldn't hear, but felt. The man followed their movement and raised his voice. "Get back inside," he yelled at the woman through the glass. "Now!" The girl flinched. The woman froze. The biker stepped forward again. The man turned back to him. "Back off," he repeated, his voice cracking slightly for the first time. "I'm warning you." The biker didn't flinch, didn't blink. Then, in the distance, the rumble came again, louder now. Multiple engines rolling through the outskirts of the neighborhood, a slow thunder crawling across the night. The man glanced toward the sound, then back at the biker, confusion flickering across his face. The biker finally spoke. One word, low and even, the first sound he'd given all night. "No." The man's eyes widened, just enough to reveal the beginning of fear. And the night held its breath. The man's face twitched when he heard that single word. A small crack in his confidence, barely there but enough for the biker to notice. Predators almost never expect resistance, especially not from someone who doesn't raise his voice, doesn't posture, doesn't need to prove anything. Silence unsettles men who feed on fear. Inside the laundromat, the woman pulled her daughter behind her as if the glass weren't the only thing keeping danger away. Her breathing sharpened, her fingers gripping the girl's shoulder. The machines hummed behind them, spinning clothes that weren't even dirty, just an excuse to stay somewhere lit. The man stepped back toward the sedan, glancing between the biker and the woman. A restless calculation worked behind his eyes. He wasn't used to pausing. He wasn't used to reconsidering. He wasn't used to being watched by someone who knew exactly what he was. "You think you can scare me?" he said, trying to drag strength back into his tone. The biker didn't react. "You don't even know what's going on," the man added louder. "You don't know what she's done." The biker's gaze flicked briefly to the laundromat. The woman hadn't done anything. The bruises, the courthouse letter, the fear embedded in every movement. They told the truth louder than any excuse this man could invent. The man rubbed the back of his neck, growing more agitated. "She's lying to you, you know that. Women like her." The biker shifted his stance, barely noticeable, but it silenced the man instantly. Some movements carry weight not because they're big, but because they're deliberate. The biker's presence didn't rise. It condensed, grounding itself like a storm forming in slow motion. The man swallowed. "Look, I'm just taking my family home." The biker's eyes met his again, cold, unmoved. "You don't get it," the man snapped, his voice cracking under growing frustration. "She's my wife. That kid is my daughter. I have a right." The biker looked at him for a long moment, then at the laundromat, then back at the man. The man's jaw twitched. "You don't understand what that means." But the biker did. A man who claimed ownership instead of responsibility, a man who believed fear earned him loyalty, a man who expected obedience from people he broke down. A gust of wind swept across the lot, carrying dust, cold air, and the low vibration of engines nearing the street. The man turned toward the sound again, unease etching itself deeper into the lines of his face. "What is that?" he muttered. He looked back at the biker. "You call someone?" The biker didn't answer. He stepped away from the bike, closing the space by another slow, controlled step. The man backed up until he nearly bumped his sedan. His hand dropped toward the inside of his jacket, hovering near something hidden. The biker didn't escalate. He didn't raise his voice or reach for anything. He simply held his ground, and that alone shook the man more than any threat could have. Inside the laundromat, the girl pressed her forehead to the glass. Her breath left a clear circle against the cold surface. She wasn't afraid of the biker. She was watching him the way someone watches a fire grow inside a dark room, quietly, with hope she didn't dare name. The woman lifted her phone with trembling hands, holding it close to her chest, as if deciding whether to call the police. But she lowered it again. She'd tried before. It hadn't helped. Her eyes stayed locked on the man outside, not pleading, not begging, just tired, bone-deep tired. The engines grew louder, not rushing, not aggressive, steady, intentional. The kind of sound that didn't sneak up. It announced itself. The man turned, just as the first headlight beam cut across the far edge of the lot. One motorcycle, then another, then 4 more behind them. Slow, unhurried, rolling in with the confidence of men who didn't need to prove where they belonged. The man's face drained of color. "What the hell?" he whispered. The bikes pulled into the lot one by one, forming a loose half circle, not blocking anyone, not boxing anyone in, just present. Their engines idled at low rumble, filling the air with a pressure that made the night feel smaller. None of them looked at the woman, none of them looked at the girl. Every pair of eyes settled somewhere between the biker and the man standing beside the sedan. A man with a grey beard nodded once toward the biker, a silent acknowledgement. No greetings, no questions, just understanding. Another rider, younger but heavy-set, hung back, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the sedan. A quiet message: no one leaves without being seen. The man tried to straighten his posture, but his shoulders betrayed him, trembling slightly. Why are they here?" he stammered, his voice cracking again. "I didn't do anything." The biker finally spoke, his voice low, even, almost flat. "You followed her." The man blinked. "You waited outside her job last week. How do you... You grabbed her arm in the parking lot 2 days ago. The man opened his mouth, shut it, then tried again. She told you that? The biker didn't answer. He didn't have to. His knowledge came from observation, not rumors. From the photo sticking out of her purse. From the courthouse letter. From the bruises shaped exactly like the man's knuckles. The man took a step toward the laundromat. This is between us. She needs to come with me. The biker took 1 step into his path. The man stopped dead. A second bike rumbled a little louder, a subtle warning from behind. The man looked around, panic beginning to replace anger. You can't do this. I can call the cops. The biker tilted his head slightly, a gesture that said more than any threat. The man wasn't afraid of police, but he was terrified of silence he couldn't control. Inside the laundromat, the girl whispered something to her mother, her small hand gripping the woman's sleeve. The mother didn't move. She didn't breathe. Her eyes stayed locked on the biker like he was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. The man's voice broke again. She's my wife. The biker answered with a quiet certainty that didn't rise or shake. She doesn't belong to you. The words hit the man harder than any punch. His breath stuttered. His hand left his jacket, palms raised slightly as if he could push back the truth. You don't get to take her, he said, desperation creeping in. You don't get to step between a man and his... But the biker cut him off, not with words, but by turning his head slightly, listening. The engines in the lot shifted tone. More bikes approaching, reinforcements without being called, riders who followed the road's instinct. The man followed the sound, eyes wide. How many of you are there? The biker didn't blink. Enough. The air tightened around them. The woman's fear met the man's panic, and the girl's fragile resolve hovered like a thread ready to snap, and the night moved toward the edge of something irreversible. The man's breathing turned shallow, his chest rising and falling in quick, uneven bursts. The parking lot, once wide and empty, now felt like a cage tightening around him. The biker didn't move. The other riders didn't move. Only the man shifted, twitching like an animal trapped between instinct and consequence. Inside the laundromat, the woman pressed a hand against the glass, not a signal, not a plea, just a reflex born from fear stretching too far for too long. The girl mirrored her mother's posture, her eyes locked on the biker outside. She wasn't searching for a savior. She was looking at a line being drawn, finally, between danger and safety. The man tried to step toward the door again, but the biker blocked him without effort. 1 step. That was all it took. The man froze like he'd hit a wall he didn't know was there. I just need to talk to her, he said, voice cracking. She won't listen to me unless... The biker's silence cut him off sharper than any blade. The man's eyes darted from face to face in the half-circle of bikes. None of the riders looked impatient. None looked angry. They were calm in a way that made the man's fear rise like something climbing up his throat. You think you can scare me with all this? He tried again. The biker didn't answer. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward the laundromat door, a gesture so small most people wouldn't catch it. But the man did, because it meant the woman was no longer invisible. Her fear was no longer unseen. He was no longer the only force pressing on her life. The man stepped closer to the biker, just enough to pretend he still had authority. She's coming with me. The biker's eyes lowered to the man's shoulder, specifically to the tiny fleck of dried blood near the seam of his jacket. A shape identical to the bruise on the woman's arm. The biker took another step forward, closing the space between them 2 inches. The man's voice faltered. I wasn't... The biker said nothing. His silence pressed harder than violence, and it forced the man to fill the quiet with the truth he'd been avoiding. She makes me angry sometimes, okay? One of the older riders exhaled a slow breath. No words, no movement, just disappointment settling into the air like ash. The man felt the shift. I didn't mean to hurt her. She's dramatic. She makes things up. You don't know her. The biker leaned in just enough that the man's next breath stalled. No raised voice, no threat. Just a quiet presence reminding him that lies weighed nothing next to bruises. You don't get it, the man insisted, panic rising. She's taking my daughter from me. The biker's gaze flicked briefly to the laundromat, where the girl pressed her forehead to the glass, eyes wide, hands trembling. The truth sat there in her small posture, in the courthouse letter tucked into her backpack, in the way her mother's body hovered protectively without touching the window. The man saw the biker look at them and snapped, desperation flaring into anger. "That's my family. She needs to come home." The biker's voice finally came, low, steady, almost quiet enough to miss. "She's not going anywhere with you." The man's face twisted. "You don't get to decide." The biker stepped forward again, forcing the man to stumble back into the side of his own sedan. The thud echoed across the lot. The man reached behind him, fumbling for the door handle, his voice rising into something shrill. "Back off, I swear I'll—" He didn't finish the sentence, because the rumble of engines grew louder again, 8 more bikes rolling slowly into the lot from the street. No formation, no theatrics, just presence. Heavy, calculated, riders who had seen enough to understand what they were stepping into. The man looked around, panic swallowing whatever bravado he had left. "This is insane. This is harassment." One rider killed his engine and stepped off his bike, a tall man with a quiet stare that held the weight of someone who'd lived through darker nights. He walked toward the biker, not the man, and stopped beside him. No words exchanged, no need. Another rider pulled up near the laundromat entrance, positioning himself between the door and the sedan without even glancing inside. The woman's posture eased, just slightly. The girl's eyes softened for the first time that night. The man turned on the biker, voice cracking under pressure. "You don't know what she's done to me. You don't know what she says about me. You don't know—" The biker spoke again, just 3 quiet words. "I know enough." The man froze. The biker pointed, once, toward the courthouse letter hanging inside the girl's backpack, visible now through the glass. His voice stayed level. "You were warned." The man's breath caught. "You can't keep her from me." The biker didn't move. "I'm not keeping her." He let the silence fall for a beat. "You are." The man's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Because for the first time, the truth was undeniable. His fear wasn't of the biker, or even the riders. It was of losing control, of someone standing between him and the power he wielded over a woman who had run out of ways to fight back. The biker lifted his chin slightly, an unspoken order. 2 riders stepped toward the sedan, not touching it, not threatening, just making distance impossible for the man to escape without passing them. Another rider positioned himself near the entrance, making sure the woman didn't have to walk out alone. The man's voice thinned into something fragile. "She can't do this. She can't take my kid. She can't—" "She already did," the biker said quietly. The man shook his head violently. No, you don't understand. I'm her father." The biker's eyes stayed on his. "Be a father, then." The man flinched like he'd been struck. The biker didn't continue. He didn't need to. The silence afterward carried enough judgment to collapse whatever remained of the man's certainty. The man's anger deflated into shaking. He looked at the laundromat again, at the woman who refused to step outside, at the girl who clung to her mother's coat. Neither of them moved toward him. Not anymore. He looked back at the biker, voice barely holding together. "You're all making a mistake." The biker's expression didn't change. "Leave." The word wasn't loud, it wasn't shouted, but it hit the man with a force that made his knees bend slightly. "No," the man whispered. "She's mine. She belongs—" The biker stepped forward one last time. "She belongs safe." The man stumbled backward, scrambled into the driver's seat, and slammed the door. His hands shook so hard he fumbled the keys. When the engine finally started, he reversed too fast, tires squealing. No rider moved to stop him. No one chased. Predators don't get pursuit. They get distance. He sped out of the lot, disappearing into the dark street with the weight of 100 unspoken consequences behind him. The biker watched the taillights fade until they vanished completely. Only then did he turn toward the laundromat. The riders stayed in position, silent, steady, unshaken, and the confrontation settled into a heavy, necessary silence. For a long moment after the sedan disappeared, no one moved. Engines idled low, a steady, controlled growl echoing off the brick walls and cracked pavement. The laundromat's neon sign buzzed overhead, flickering between tired colors. casting the world in washed-out blue and pale white. Inside, the washing machine kept spinning clothes that didn't matter, filling the silence with a hollow, mechanical rhythm. The biker stood in the center of it all, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes fixed on the empty stretch of road where the taillights had vanished. He wasn't making sure the man was gone. He already knew he was. He was measuring something else, the weight of the night, the line that had been drawn, the quiet shift from fear to something that might one day feel like safety. One of the older riders looked over at him, waiting. No questions, just readiness, in case this wasn't over. It was the girl who moved first. She slipped away from her mother's side, leaving her small handprint on the glass door as she stepped closer. Her mother reached instinctively, fingers brushing her sleeve, but didn't pull her back. Not this time. The woman watched her daughter with eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little, and for once let the girl move towards something that didn't look like danger. The girl pushed the laundromat door open slowly. The chime above it rang out, thin but clear. The cold air hit her face and she shivered, hugging her arms to her chest. Her shoes scuffed against the concrete as she walked, small steps carrying her out into a parking lot filled with engines and leather and silence. No one spoke to her. No one leaned down or smiled or tried to make the moment softer than it was. She walked until she was standing just a few feet from the biker. Up close, he was taller than she'd thought, heavier, rougher around the edges. His jacket bore marks of miles she'd never imagine, and nights she was too young to understand. But his eyes were steady, and something in that steadiness made her shoulders relax. She looked up at him, her voice barely louder than the hum of the engines. "I tried," she said. "I really tried to protect her." The words weren't new. He'd heard them already near the gas pump. But out here, under the hum of bikes and the fading smell of burnt rubber, they carried a different weight. Less fear, more confession. He studied her for a long second. The laminated name tag on her backpack swung gently with her breathing, the folded courthouse paper half visible behind it, a small silent piece of truth pressed into cheap plastic. He didn't kneel. He didn't soften his posture. He spoke to her like he would to anyone staring down a fight too big for them. "You did." Her throat bobbed. But he kept coming back. His gaze didn't leave her face. "That's not on you." She blinked up at him, as if the sentence didn't quite fit into the way her world had been explained to her. She glanced back at the laundromat, where her mother stood frozen just inside the doorway, one hand still pressed against the glass. The woman pushed the door open and stepped out slowly, her body tense, knees unsteady. Her eyes moved over the line of riders, the bikes, the road, the empty place where the sedan had been. She wasn't accustomed to being on this side of a standoff. She looked like someone waiting for the next impact. Her gaze finally landed on the biker. She didn't thank him. She didn't rush forward. She just stood there, clutching her own arms, sleeves tugged down over bruises, hair pulled back in a weak attempt at composure. He won't stop," she said quietly, voice frayed. "He never does." The biker's eyes dropped to the courthouse letter pressed behind the plastic name tag on the girl's backpack. He lifted his chin toward it in a small gesture. "You filed it?" he asked. She followed his gaze, understanding what he meant. She shook her head once. "I tried," she said. "I went. I filled everything out. But then he found out. He said if I turned it in, he would—" Her words trailed off, swallowed by a shaking breath. "I thought if I just stayed quiet, if I didn't push, if I didn't make him more angry." Silence finished the sentence for her. The biker nodded once, not in approval, not in judgment, just acknowledgement. One of the riders near the entrance reached into his vest and pulled out a folded card. He didn't walk up to her. He placed it on the low metal newspaper rack near the door and stepped back. No speeches, no explanations. The biker glanced at it, then at her. "Pick it up," he said. She hesitated, then walked over and took the card. The print was simple. A name, a number, no logo, no title, just what mattered. "Shelter," the rider said, his voice rough but quiet. "Women, kids, no questions asked. They know your kind of paperwork. They don't lose it." Her fingers tightened around the card. She looked at the biker again. "He'll come back," she whispered. The biker didn't argue. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He didn't promise that men like that just disappear. He dealt in reality, not comfort. "Next time," he said slowly, "he won't find you alone." Her eyes shimmered for a moment, but the tears didn't fall. She swallowed them down the way she'd been doing for years. Only this time, there was something else mixed in, a thin line of resolve. The girl stepped closer to her mother and slipped her hand into hers. It wasn't a desperate grip anymore, it was a steady one. The biker nodded toward the courthouse letter in the backpack. "Turn it in," he said. Her jaw clenched. "He said if I did, he doesn't get to say anymore." His tone didn't rise, he didn't push, he just laid the words out, solid and unmoving. A fact, not a suggestion. She looked down at her daughter, then at the card in her hand. Her thumb rubbed over the ink, as if memorizing the number without meaning to. "What if they don't help?" she asked. The older rider with the grey beard spoke for the first time, his voice worn but certain. "If they don't, they'll hear from us." He didn't smile. The others didn't move. There was no bravado in it, just a simple commitment. The woman let out a breath that sounded more like a collapse. Not broken this time, just tired of being afraid. She nodded once. "Okay," she said. The word wasn't loud, it didn't echo, but it settled into the space between them with more force than anything the shouting man in the sedan had thrown at her. The girl lifted her backpack off one shoulder, pulled out the folded letter and handed it to her mother. Her small fingers brushed against her mother's bandaged knuckles. "Can we go now?" the girl asked. The woman looked at the road, then at the biker, then at the riders still holding the space around them. One of the bikes turned slightly, enough to align with the exit, not blocking, escorting. The biker jerked his chin toward her car parked at the edge of the lot. "Drive," he said. "Straight to that address, don't stop in between." She looked at the card again. They won't want us showing up this late." "They will," he replied. Something in his certainty pushed her forward more than any encouragement could have. She nodded again, pressing the letter and the card to her chest. The girl gave the biker one last look. Not wide-eyed hero worship, not awe. Just a quiet measuring stare from someone who had seen too much and was trying to file this night somewhere in her memory. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't answer. She didn't seem offended. She turned back toward the car, walking beside her mother. Their steps were slow at first, then steadier. The woman unlocked the door, helped her daughter in, then slid behind the wheel. She sat there for a second, fingers wrapped tight around the card, the letter resting on her lap. The biker watched as she started the engine. As she pulled out of the lot, two of the riders followed, engines low, headlights hanging back at a respectful distance. No sirens, no flashing lights. Just quiet shadow keeping watch until they were sure she reached somewhere safer than a flickering laundromat and a haunted parking lot. The biker stayed. The remaining riders lingered in a loose circle, the air filled with exhaust and unspoken understanding. The road had brought them here, and when it was done it would pull them away again. That was the way of it. The older rider stepped closer to the biker. "She'll make it?" he asked. "If she turns it in," the biker replied. "And if he comes back?" The biker finally looked away from the empty exit and toward the dark stretch of street where the sedan had vanished earlier. "Then he'll find out this isn't just between him and her anymore." The older rider nodded once. That was enough. One by one, engines began to rise from a low rumble to a full, steady growl. The riders mounted their bikes without ceremony. No one said goodbye. No one clapped shoulders or traded jokes. The night wasn't built for that. The biker swung a leg over his own bike and settled into the seat. The leather creaked under his weight, familiar and worn. He glanced once at the laundromat, empty now, except for the machines still turning clothes that no one would bother to fold. The girl's breath circle on the glass had already faded. He turned the throttle lightly, feeling the engine respond beneath him. No medals, no thanks, no applause. Just another night where something ugly had been interrupted before it went further. That was enough. It had to be. The bikes rolled out together, not in parade, not in show. Just a line of engines disappearing into the dark, leaving behind the ghost of their presence and the thin, stubborn hope that maybe, for once, fear wouldn't get the final say. By the time the laundromat lights shut off, their taillights were long gone. And somewhere across town, a tired woman stepped through the door of a shelter with a child at her side, a letter in her hand, and the faint, lingering sound of distant engines still ringing in her ears like a promise. What would you have done in his place? If you understand the Guardian's code, leave your mark below and share this story.